To be the less loved child is a curious thing. It's not a role you audition for, but when you're assigned at birth, a silent casting call where the results are known to everyone but you for a very long time. In our family, the parts were set from the beginning. My sister was the sun, a dazzling, fragile star around which our entire family universe revolved. I was the moon, a quiet satellite visible only in her absence, tasked with reflecting her light and managing the gravitational pull of her needs. She was the golden child born with a seemingly delicate constitution that became the central narrative of our lives. From her earliest years, there was always something wrong. A mysterious fatigue that kept her from school on exam days, a phantom ache in her joints that coincided perfectly with household chores, a dizzy spell that would manifest whenever I received praise for an achievement. Our home became a shrine to her ailments. The medicine cabinet overflowed with bottles of pills and potions, most of them herbal remedies or vitamins for conditions that doctors could never quite diagnose. Our dinner conversations were a litany of her symptoms, a daily medical briefing where my father would look concerned, and my mother would fret, patting her hand and promising to find yet another specialist who might finally understand her unique suffering. I was the healthy one, the responsible one, the one who was expected to understand. My childhood was a series of canceled plans and shushed admonitions. Don't play your music so loud, your sister is resting. You'll have to miss your friend's party, we have an appointment for your sister. Can you handle the dishes tonight, your sister is having a bad day. I learned to live in the shadows of her illness, a permanent state of semi-existence. I harbored a secret, a deep and abiding skepticism that I dared not voice. I saw the way her fatigue would miraculously vanish when a more exciting social invitation arose. I saw the painful joints manage a 4-hour shopping spree for a prom dress. I saw the brain fog clear with stunning speed when it came to remembering a slight I had committed against her years ago. But to question her illness was to commit the ultimate sin in our family. It was to be cruel, unfeeling, jealous. So I played my part. I fetched her glasses of water, I fluffed her pillows, I offered sympathetic murmurs while inside a cold, hard knot of resentment grew. I poured my energy into my studies, then my career, building a life for myself outside the suffocating atmosphere of our family home. I became a successful architect, a builder of solid, tangible things, a world away from the amorphous phantom pains that defined my sister's existence. I thought I had escaped. I thought I had built a life sturdy enough to withstand the pull of my family's dysfunction. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother, her voice a high, thin wire of panic. It's her kidneys, she sobbed into the phone. They're failing. The words hung in the air, a death sentence. A lifetime of vague complaints had finally coalesced into something real, something terrifying, something with a name: end-stage renal disease. My mother explained that my sister had been feeling increasingly unwell for months, a new level of exhaustion, a puffiness in her face that they had dismissed as allergies. But a new specialist, a renowned nephrologist, had run a battery of tests and the results were unequivocal. Her kidneys were shutting down. She needed a transplant to survive. And then came the second blow, delivered not with panic but with a chilling sense of expectation. They've tested us, she said, referring to herself and my father. We're not a match, but you're her full sibling, you're her best hope. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a request. It was a summons. I was being called upon to play the ultimate role, the savior, the provider, the one who would literally give a piece of herself to sustain the life of the golden child. My blood ran cold. That old familiar skepticism, which I had suppressed for decades, rose up a bitter tide of doubt. It felt too perfect, too poetic, too dramatic. The culmination of a lifetime of escalating medical theater. I flew home the next day and walked into a house draped in mourning. My sister was ensconced on the sofa, buried under a mountain of blankets, looking pale and ethereal. My parents hovered around her, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and holy purpose. They looked at me as I walked in, and I saw the hope in their eyes, the desperate certainty that I was the answer to their prayers. I sat with them as they recounted the doctor's grim prognosis, his talk of GFR numbers and creatinine levels, words they repeated with a kind of reverent horror. They had already scheduled my appointment for compatibility testing. They spoke of the surgery as a foregone conclusion. We'll need to turn your old room into a recovery suite for you, my mother said, already redecorating my childhood in her mind. I need to think, I said, my voice sounding loud and harsh in the funereal quiet of the room. I need to see the test results. I want to speak with the doctor myself. The reaction was instantaneous and brutal. My mother's face crumpled as if I had slapped her. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a look of cold fury I had not seen since I was a teenager, and my sister, a single perfect tear traced a path down her pale cheek. Her voice was a barely audible whisper. You wouldn't let me die, would you? The emotional blackmail was so potent, so perfectly executed, it almost worked. The guilt was a physical thing, a heavy cloak they threw over my shoulders. But for the first time in my life, I refused to wear it. This isn't about letting you die, I said, forcing myself to meet her gaze. This is about me undergoing a major invasive surgery to donate a vital organ. I have a right to be fully informed. I have a right to a second opinion. a second opinion. My father boomed, his voice echoing in the tense silence. You dare to question the top nephrologist in the state? What is wrong with you? Don't you see how much she's suffering? You've always been jealous of her, haven't you? Resentful of the attention she needed. We see you. We see your true colors now. The accusations rained down on me, a hailstorm of stored-up resentments. I was selfish, I was heartless, I was a monster. I was the bad daughter, finally revealing her true nature. I stood my ground. I refused to be tested. I refused to be emotionally bullied into a surgical suite. I told them that my decision was not a no but a not yet. I would not proceed until I had all the facts verified by a medical professional of my own choosing. They saw it as a declaration of war. A week later, they summoned me back to the house. The atmosphere was even colder than before. My sister sat between my parents on the sofa, a fragile little bird flanked by her ferocious protectors. My father was holding a sheaf of papers. We've been to see our lawyer, he announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. We have updated our will. Given your sister's ongoing and extensive medical needs and her inability to provide for herself, and given your unwillingness to help, we have decided that our entire estate will be placed in a trust for her sole benefit, to ensure she is cared for after we're gone. I stared at them, my heart turning to a block of ice. It wasn't about the money. I had my own career, my own financial security. It was the finality of it, the ultimate statement of my worthlessness in their eyes. They were not just disinheriting me, they were erasing me. They had chosen. In the great ledger of their love, I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. My sister looked at me from across the room, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't the look of a dying woman, it was a look of triumph. She had won. She had finally and completely won. But as I walked out of that house and into the cold night air, I made a silent vow. This wasn't over. They thought they had ended the story, but they had just given me the motivation to find out how it really began. They thought I was selfish and cruel. They had no idea how right they were about to be. The excommunication was swift and absolute. My key to the house no longer worked. My calls went to voicemail. My texts were left unread, marked by the cruel blue ticks of a message delivered and deliberately ignored. I was an island, a population of one caste adrift from the family archipelago. The first few days I was numb, functioning on autopilot, moving through the motions of my life, my job, my errands, while a silent scream echoed in the chambers of my heart. The betrayal was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. It wasn't just that they had cut me out of the will, they had cut me out of their lives with the clean, cold precision of a scalpel. They had performed an amputation, excising the daughter who had failed to serve her purpose. But as the shock subsided, something else began to crystallize in its place, a cold, hard certainty. My sister was lying. This wasn't a suspicion anymore, it was a fact I knew in my bones. And my parents were not just victims of her deception. They were willing accomplices, their desperate need for a fragile child to care for making them blind to the truth that must have been screaming at them for years. I realized that vindication was no longer my goal. This was a rescue mission. I had to save my parents from the beautiful, sweet-faced monster they had raised, and I had to save my sister from the prison of lies she had built for herself. The first step was to understand the battlefield. I tried the direct approach, calling the nephrologist's office and attempting to get information as a concerned family member. I was met with the impenetrable wall of HIPAA privacy laws, a fortress I could not breach. My sister's medical history was her secret, and she was guarding it with her life, or rather with the lie of her dying. Blocked by official channels, I turned to the unofficial. I became an archaeologist of our family's past, digging through the strata of our shared history. I pulled out old photo albums, boxes of home movies, my childhood diaries. I was looking for a pattern, a breadcrumb trail that would lead me to the source of the rot, and I found it everywhere. There was my sister, age 7, wailing about a stomach ache on the morning of her school spelling bee, a contest I was favored to win. The bee was missed. A trip to the doctor ensued, followed by a week of pampering on the couch with ice cream and movies. The stomach ache was never diagnosed. There she was at 15, her face a mask of tragic pain, clutching her ankle the night before a family trip to a rustic cabin for a week of hiking, a trip she had loudly protested. The trip was canceled. The ankle miraculously healed the following Monday in time for her to attend a party with her friends. The pattern was so clear, so obvious, I felt a fool for not having seen it for what it was. It wasn't just a child's ploy for attention, it was a sophisticated long-term strategy of control and manipulation. Every time the spotlight threatened to shift to me, every time a situation arose that she found unpleasant, she would deploy the weapon of her own body, her own manufactured fragility. Sickness was her superpower. My investigation led me back to the present, to the man who had given her lie its most powerful validation, the nephrologist. I began to dig into his professional life. His website was slick and professional, his credentials impeccable, but there was something missing, a lack of depth. The patient testimonials were generic and glowing, the kind that could be easily fabricated. I searched for him on medical review boards and found a few scattered reviews, most of them unremarkable. But then I found it buried in the archives of a court website from another state, a lawsuit filed against him 8 years prior. A patient had accused him of misdiagnosis and overprescription of immunosuppressants leading to severe complications. The case had been settled out of court, the records sealed. It was a small crack in his polished facade, but it was enough. It told me he was a doctor who could be pressured, a man who might be inclined to see what a convincing patient wanted him to see, especially when that patient's family was wealthy and desperate. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a professional, someone who could navigate the legal and ethical minefields I was facing. A friend from college recommended a private investigator, a woman named Clara who specialized in sensitive family matters. She was a former investigative journalist, sharp, discreet, and completely unsentimental. I met her in a quiet coffee shop and laid out the entire sordid history of my family. I expected judgment, or at least a raised eyebrow. Instead, she just listened, nodding occasionally, her eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she looked at me and said something that solidified my resolve. In my experience, she said, people who lie about small things for a long time eventually graduate to lying about big things, and this is the biggest lie of all. Clara's first move was to put my sister under surveillance. I felt a visceral wave of guilt and shame signing that contract, agreeing to spy on my own family. It felt like a betrayal, a new low in our fractured relationship. But what choice did I have? The truth was a splinter buried deep under the skin, and I needed a professional to help me extract it. For the first 2 weeks, Clara's reports were dishearteningly predictable. She documented my sister's life of a sick person. She was chauffeured by my mother to her appointments at the nephrologist's clinic. She was seen walking slowly, leaning on my father's arm for support. She rarely left the house otherwise. The performance was flawless. My parents had created a perfect gilded cage for her, and she was playing the part of the dying bird with heartbreaking perfection. I started to doubt myself. Was I the one who was crazy? Was I so twisted by resentment that I was inventing a conspiracy where there was only a tragedy? And then came the breakthrough. It was a Wednesday. My sister had an appointment for what my mother had tearfully described as dialysis mapping, a preparatory procedure for the treatment that would keep her alive. Clara watched as my mother dropped her off at the front of the clinic. She watched as my mother drove away, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She waited. An hour later, my sister walked out of the clinic. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking around, and then something remarkable happened. Her entire posture changed. The slump in her shoulders straightened. The pained shuffle of her feet was replaced by a brisk, purposeful stride. She was no longer a patient. She was a woman with a destination. She didn't call for a ride. She walked 2 blocks to a public transit station and took a bus to a part of the city our family never frequented. Clara followed her. The bus dropped her off in a trendy neighborhood filled with yoga studios and organic cafes. My sister walked into a large upscale fitness center, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing rows of gleaming equipment. Clara waited outside, her heart pounding. An hour later, she sent me the first photo. It was a picture of my sister taken through the large front window of the gym. She was on a stationary bike, her face flushed with exertion, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She wasn't just exercising, she was attacking the machine with a fierce energy that belied any claim of kidney failure. The second photo arrived 10 minutes later. It was of a class schedule posted on the gym's door. Circled in red was the class that was currently in session, Advanced High-Intensity Interval Training. I stared at the pictures on my phone, my vision blurring. The lie was no longer an abstract theory. It was here in full color, undeniable and grotesque. The image of my sister, vibrant and strong in a place of health while my parents sat at home mourning her decline, was a cognitive dissonance so profound it made me feel physically ill. She wasn't just lying to our parents, she was laughing at them. She was spitting on their love, their sacrifice, their pain. The guilt I had felt about hiring an investigator evaporated, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. This was no longer a rescue mission, it was a hunt. The photographs were the key that unlocked the door, and behind it was a labyrinth of deceit more intricate and more pathological than I could have ever imagined. Seeing my sister's face glowing with health in the middle of a high-intensity workout while she was supposed to be at death's door was a moment of terrible clarity. This wasn't just about avoiding a family vacation or getting out of a spelling bee. This was a carefully constructed alternate reality, a full-time job. Clara, the investigator, sensing she was onto something big, intensified her surveillance. The gym was just the beginning. My sister, it turned out, was living a complete double life. On her sick days, she was the fragile recluse doted on by our parents. But on her good days, when our mother had a charity luncheon or our father was at his golf club, she would slip away. Clara tracked her to upscale shopping malls, to day spas, to long lunches with friends who looked at her with no trace of pity or concern. She was a chameleon, a master of disguise, shedding her sick skin as easily as a snake. Clara suggested a new line of inquiry: finances. I knew my parents gave my sister a generous allowance for her medical incidentals and other needs. She had no job, having claimed to be too unwell to work since graduating from college. I had always assumed she lived a modest life within those means. Clara's financial deep dive proved how naive I was. She discovered a credit card in my sister's name, one linked to a bank my parents didn't use. The statements which Clara obtained through means I chose not to question were a roadmap of her secret life. Thousands of dollars spent on designer clothes, high-end cosmetics, and yes, a premium membership to the very gym where she had been photographed. But there was another set of charges more mysterious and more disturbing: regular monthly payments to something called the Aura Wellness Collective. It wasn't a clinic or a hospital. Its address led to a discreet office in a repurposed warehouse district. It had no website, no listed phone number. It was a ghost. Clara focused her attention on this new mystery. She staked out the building, and what she discovered was the rotten core of my sister's entire deception. The Aura Wellness Collective was not a medical facility. It was a high-end concierge for charlatans. It was run by a man who called himself a holistic practitioner, but who was in fact a disgraced doctor who had lost his medical license for insurance fraud and malpractice. He now ran a lucrative business providing his wealthy clients with whatever they needed to game the system: fake doctors' notes, bogus disability claims, and most damning of all, falsified lab results. For the right price, he could make you look sick on paper in any way you desired. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening finality. My sister hadn't just been a convincing actress. She had been a meticulous scriptwriter, director, and producer of her own medical drama. She had likely been a client of this quack for years, using his services to create a paper trail of minor ailments that she would then take to legitimate but gullible or negligent doctors. The final step in her masterpiece had been the kidney failure diagnosis. It was a brilliant move. It was dramatic, life-threatening, and most importantly, it required a sacrifice from the one person she saw as her lifelong rival, me. She had weaponized her own body and aimed it directly at my heart, but the most horrifying realization was yet to come. To fool a real nephrologist, you needed more than just fake paperwork. You needed real symptoms. Your blood and urine had to tell the story. Clara's source inside the quack's clinic, a disgruntled former employee looking for revenge and a payday, provided the final grotesque detail. My sister had been supplied with a cocktail of drugs and herbal supplements designed to temporarily wreak havoc on her system. She was taking substances that would artificially inflate her creatinine levels, spike her blood pressure, and cause protein to leak into her urine, the classic markers of renal failure. She had been systematically poisoning herself in small, controlled doses before every appointment with the nephrologist. She was so committed to the lie that she was willing to do real harm to her own body to make it believable. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was a profound and terrifying mental illness. The label for it flashed in my mind, a half-remembered term from a psychology class: Munchausen syndrome. A psychiatric disorder where a person fakes or induces illness to gain attention and sympathy. My sister had a textbook case, but on a scale that was almost operatic in its grandiosity. Armed with this mountain of evidence, my guilt was replaced by a profound and chilling sorrow. My sister was not a villain in a simple melodrama. She was a deeply disturbed individual trapped in a web of her own making. And my parents were her unwitting enablers, their love and concern the very air she needed to breathe her lies into life. I was faced with an impossible choice. I could expose her. I could march into my parents' house, lay the evidence on the table, and watch as their world imploded. It would be a moment of absolute vindication for me. But what would be the cost? It would destroy my parents. Their lives for 2 decades had been defined by their role as caregivers. To learn that their love had been a fuel for a pathological lie might be a truth too devastating for them to survive. And it would destroy my sister. Publicly exposed, she would be ruined, shamed, and possibly facing criminal charges for fraud. The scandal would be a public spectacle. The other option was to do nothing, to walk away, to save myself and leave them to their toxic folie à trois, their shared delusion. I could let them write me out of their will and their lives and be free of them forever, but I couldn't. As much as I resented them, they were still my family. I couldn't leave them in a burning house, even if they were the ones who had set the fire. I decided on a third path: a controlled demolition. I made an appointment with the nephrologist. I didn't bring a lawyer. I came alone as a worried sister. I laid out my concerns calmly and rationally. I spoke of my sister's history of unexplained illnesses. I mentioned her surprising energy on her good days. Then I placed one of the Pi's photos on his desk, the one of her on the stationary bike. I didn't threaten him. I just asked, "How is this possible for a woman whose kidneys are in total failure?" I saw the flash of fear in his eyes, the fear of a lawsuit, the fear of a ruined reputation. He had been fooled. He had been negligent. He had seen a textbook case presented by a convincing patient and her desperate family, and he hadn't looked any deeper. He immediately became my ally. He started talking about the need for more confirmatory testing, about the possibility of anomalous results. He was already building a wall to protect himself, but it was a wall that would also help me. He agreed to call my parents and my sister in for an urgent consultation to discuss the new findings. The stage was set for the final act. I had the truth, I had the evidence, and I had a terrified doctor who was now motivated to help me reveal it. The question that haunted me was what would be left once the curtain came down. The family meeting was my idea, a final supper before the execution of the lie. I called my mother and framed it as an olive branch, a last attempt to talk things through before I made a final decision about the donation. Her voice was cold, but she agreed. The prospect of getting what she wanted was enough to make her tolerate my presence for one more evening. I insisted on cooking at their house, a symbolic reclaiming of a space where I had long been made to feel like a guest. I arrived to find the atmosphere thick with a cloying somberness. My sister was in her customary position on the sofa, wrapped in a cashmere throw, looking wan and beautiful, a tragic heroine in the final act of her performance. She accepted my presence with a look of weary magnanimity, as if my being there was a great and painful effort for her. My parents were polite but distant, moving around me with a careful choreography of avoidance. The dinner itself was a silent affair, each clink of cutlery a small explosion in the tense quiet. They were waiting for my capitulation. I was waiting for the right moment to detonate the truth. After the plates were cleared, I asked them all to join me in the living room. I didn't ask for the door to be locked or make any grand, dramatic gestures. I simply stood before the fireplace, the symbolic heart of the home, and began to speak. My voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos I was about to unleash. I started not with an accusation but with a story. I told them about a little girl who was so afraid of being overlooked that she learned that being sick was a kind of currency, a way to buy love and attention. I talked about how that currency became more and more valuable over time until it was the only one she knew how to use. My sister stared at me, her expression unreadable. My parents shifted uncomfortably, not yet understanding that the story was about them. Then I stopped telling stories. I placed a single photograph on the coffee table, the picture of my sister at the gym, a healthy, vibrant woman full of life. "It's a fake," she said immediately, her voice sharp. "You've always been a liar." "You're just jealous." My father nodded in agreement, his face a mask of disappointment in me. I ignored them and placed a second document on the table next to the photo. The credit card statement showing the gym membership, the designer clothes, the spa days. My sister's face paled slightly. She stammered something about a friend's generosity, a loan she was paying back. The lies were coming faster, now more frantic. The threads of her narrative were beginning to fray. Next came the information about the Aura Wellness Collective, the quack doctor, the falsified medical records. I laid out the entire scheme with cold, factual precision. The air in the room grew thin and hard to breathe. My parents looked at my sister, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They wanted to believe her, but the evidence was becoming a tidal wave. And then I played my final card. I took out a small digital voice recorder and pressed play. It was a recording of a phone call Clara had managed to capture between my sister and the quack. Her voice, clear and confident, was heard discussing the dosage of the drugs she needed to take to produce the right symptoms for her upcoming confirmatory tests with the nephrologist. She was laughing on the recording, laughing as she described my parents' tearful devotion. That was the moment the illusion shattered. My sister didn't crumble into tears of remorse. She exploded into a supernova of rage. Her face contorted into a snarl of pure hatred so venomous it was unrecognizable. She lunged at me, screaming that I was a monster, that I had ruined her life, that I had taken everything from her. My father had to physically restrain her, pulling her back as she thrashed and spat insults. The mask was gone, and the person underneath was a stranger. My parents stood frozen in the wreckage of their lives. The golden child they had worshipped was a phantom. The illness they had sacrificed everything for was a lie. Their love had been used as a weapon against them. The grief on their faces was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. It was the grief for a daughter who had in a very real sense just died. In the deafening silence that followed her outburst, I laid out my terms. There was no negotiation. My sister would be admitted to a long-term inpatient psychiatric facility the next morning. If she or they refused, I would walk out the door and take the entire file of evidence to the police and the state medical board. Fraud, insurance fraud, and the conspiracy with the quack would lead to criminal charges. The nephrologist, already terrified for his career, had agreed to cooperate fully. They had no choice. My sister, defeated and silent, was taken away the next day. The will was changed back immediately, but it was a hollow victory. I had never cared about the money. I had cared about the truth. I had won, but I had lost my entire family. My parents never forgave me, not because they thought I was wrong, but because I was right. I was the living embodiment of their failure as parents, their blindness, their unwitting participation in a lie that had consumed their lives. They stayed in that house, ghosts rattling around in the empty shrine they had built for a saint who had turned out to be a demon. I sold my share of the family properties and moved to a different city. I built a new life for myself, one based on solid foundations and clear truths. Sometimes late at night I think about them. I think about my sister in her sterile hospital room, perhaps still weaving fantasies for a new captive audience. I think about my parents sitting in their quiet house mourning a daughter who was both alive and dead at the same time. I exposed the illness that was poisoning my family, but the surgery to remove it was brutal, and the patient did not survive. I am alone now, but I am free. The truth set me free, but it also cost me everything I had ever known, and I am still not sure if it was a price worth paying. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.